What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Big Six Podcast, CBS Sports Daily NFL Podcast. I'm Will Brinson. I'm your host. It is, if you are listening to the podcast, I know it's Monday, August 1st, no matter how you're taking in this podcast, because it is an emergency podcast with the Deshaun Watson suspension being handed down by Judge Sue Robinson, and the Cleveland Browns quarterback gets 6 games, a 6-game suspension for Deshaun Watson, and a very interesting and the ruling was very interesting, and the entirety of this discipline is also kind of fascinating from a legal perspective and what the NFL will do next. To break it all down with me, he looks thrilled to be here on this Monday. First Monday in August. Football's here, buddy. Ryan Wilson, how you doing?
Yeah, it's like we never left. Where's Breach, by the way?
It's outrageous. His vacationing is a problem, and we talked about this last season. And we have to talk about it again, and we're just going to have an intervention at some point.
Yeah, he was going to take his birthday vacation in January or whatever and go to Mexico, but he's
leaving during the NFL playoffs to go to Mexico.
So he's taking it on the back end here. Anyway, Deshaun Watson, 6-game suspension.
He'll be back tomorrow, by the way.
Yeah, sure. 6-game suspension. I suppose the first question is, were you surprised?
I was a little surprised it was that low.
Prisco tweeted out that he was very surprised by the number, but he didn't say whether he thought it was too low or too high. I'm assuming he thought it was too low.
Probably too low. Pete, I think Pete thinks it's too low.
He's a disciplinarian.
I would say that upon reading the ruling from Judge Sue Robinson, that
you read it? Has it been released? 16 pages?
Yeah, it's been.
I saw Florio.
I read most of it. I mean, I've read
Florio whinging that he hadn't seen it yet, so I guess it got released.
Parts of it are out there. I've read enough to know that. So essentially, here is my understanding of it: that Judge Sue Robinson, the NFL was pushing for a full-year suspension, and conditions had to be met before Deshaun Watson could be reinstated in 2023. And also, they wanted an $8 million fine because Watson and the Browns worked their way around the salary cap and the suspension situation by paying him $1 million in 2022. With that fully guaranteed contract. Watson is the current suspension is this. Watson is getting 6 games. He also can never, for the duration of his career, visit non-team approved or basically all massages moving forward have to go through the Cleveland Browns or whoever his team/club is, which is a very interesting clause to be inserted there. He has to stay out of trouble in terms of legal issues moving forward. I don't know what essentially it would be like because of this previous suspension, if you got in trouble, it would be, just multiple time offender. And it was noted that he is a first time offender, even though there's more than one time in this particular instance.
So he got his money's worth, so to speak, in terms of that's like being a one-time DUI offender and getting 3 DUIs over the weekend.
Or like he's a first-time serial offender. I mean, I think
that's a good way to put it.
Like you're a first-time offender, but you've committed and I believe Sue Robinson found that there were 3 instances where he clearly violated the personal conduct policy, 3 specific ones. He did not, his conduct did not rise to the level that meets the violent offender, which is a minimum of 6 games.
Mm-hmm.
And she noted that the previous high for the non-violent offender of the personal conduct policy of the specific, behavior related to sexual misconduct in this instance was 3 games. And that player had been warned before. And basically what Sue Robinson said was the NFL is trying to change the policy on the fly to custom fit what Deshaun Watson did and to crank up the suspension, and that there's just no precedent for it in the history of the league's disciplinary process. And therefore, she's only going to give him 6 games, which is certainly,
Here's the thing. Wherever you come down on whether it's too many games or not enough games, whether it should have been a year, whether it should have been 0 games, which is what Deshaun Watson's.
I don't think you can argue that it should be less.
That's fine. But my point is this. On some level, I think Sue Robinson's hands were tied by the history of Roger Goodell's willy-nilly meting out a punishment. Like, there is no rule of law in the NFL. There's a rule of law in this country, and you can agree or disagree with the laws. That's fine, and you can, have people elect people to change the laws or keep the laws. That's a whole another can of worms. But the NFL is its own little fiefdom, its own little empire.
It's a private enterprise. Like it's a private.
Roger Goodell is the king in the sense that he answers to 32 little chiefs around the little fiefdom here in the Game of Thrones, and he's making up the rules as it goes along. So you can be angry about the ruling. I mean, the initial Ray Rice thing was 2 games, and then the video came out, and then obviously that changed. And I do think, and this isn't just me being, what's the word? My point is this: the NFL, I feel like is probably maybe I can't think of the word. I'll think of a second. They're gonna, are you being attacked? What's going on?
It sounded like it. Can you hear that?
No,
it sounded like a hailstorm just happened outside my house. I was like,
if you're watching on YouTube, Brinson took one earphone off to see whether he was being raided by the NFL Gestapo. But my point quickly is this. I do think, and this isn't me being cynical, is the word I was looking for. The NFL wants to see which way the wind is blowing PR-wise, and then they will determine, because they have 3 days to determine whether to appeal this.
And when and for the next step, people in the chat are mentioning Calvin Ridley. We will get to that in a second. You cannot equate Calvin Ridley to Deshaun Watson. There's just 2 different.
I will take up that cause to a degree, but yeah, go ahead.
Okay. The appeal, I believe that if the NFL appeals, I'm trying to do air quotes here. The NFL is essentially like Roger Goodell gets to change the punishment, right?
So one of the pushbacks on that is this is the very first time that they've had an outside arbiter make one of these decisions without Roger Goodell being in the middle of it initially. So how does that look PR-wise if you're Roger Goodell saying, all right, here, let's do it, have a more fair way of doing it. Oh, by the way, I hate what you did. I'm going to change the ruling.
Well, I said that I've done a couple of radio hits today where I was asked that same question, what's, and here's the problem. When they redid the CBA, players were like, all right, it's time. Like, look at all this money in baseball and basketball. Like, we got to get guaranteed contracts. We got to get rid of the franchise tag. And the NFL is like, oh, look over here, everybody. You can smoke weed, and Roger Goodell won't be in charge of punishments anymore. And they're like, all right, that sounds great. And so that was one of the big carrots that they dangled in the CBA negotiation. So,
quickly, the other thing with the negotiations, it's you want the players to hold out, but here's the reality. NFL owners are going to own these teams for 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years. Players on average are playing 3.5 years. So they're going to do what's best for them in the near term, even though it may not be best for them collectively in the long term.
For sure. And so I just wonder, like, how much does that factor in? Because like you said, it's the first time with this, is he just going to flip it for the first time? Like, all right, it's cool that we have this arbitrator, but like, I don't think
here's the other thing that the NFL is so short-sighted. I mean, they're a money-making machine, but the very first case is a case that no one saw coming 3 years ago, that Deshaun Watson would have 24 civil lawsuits against him for the sexual misconduct. And that's the case in the post-Me Too era that Roger Goodell now has to decide how far he wants to push this thing. And he probably thought it was going to be some Mickey Mouse situation like the Calvin Ridley thing, which in the scheme of things isn't that serious, other than Calvin Ridley can't play football for a year because he used his own name on a betting app.
Yeah, I mean, look, the NFL is ham-fisted very often, particularly when it comes to punishments. And Judge Sue Robinson mentioned that. She said the league is forward-facing, but it's not forward-looking. And we've said that for years. The NFL is reactive and not proactive. If the NFL was proactive, it would have set up, policies in place where if, in an instance like this, where you have a first-time offender with multiple instances, you have the ability to raise the punishment level. Like, they created the policy themselves. They could change it. They could have changed it ahead of time. And that's sort of the crux of what Sue Robinson is arguing. She's applying a broader, like, public legal approach to the NFL's private business. And she acknowledges that in her ruling. It now becomes, whether does the NFL want to crank up the punishment? I would think they do, but I would also think that, like you say, they are going to see what the reaction is.
The old trial balloon, see what happens.
They do it for years.
Yeah.
And they're gonna wait and see what the reaction is. They're gonna see what kind of columns come out. They're gonna see what, how long this sits on SportsCenter, et cetera, et cetera. And if it starts to go away, they may just let it slide. And if it's a big to do for the next 48 hours, and A lot of that may have to do with what else happens in the news cycle. There's not a ton going on, if they feel like the general sentiment is that it's a poor punishment, then I think it's probably likely that they'll crank it up a little bit.
And here's the bigger issue, whether they crank it up a little bit or not, is that once again, they've tied Judge Robinson's hands or any subsequent judge who has to make such a decision because there are no rules. Everything is just throw it against the wall. And how is Roger Goodell feeling? Or how is whoever would make such a decision in the NFL office feeling at that moment? And that's the concern. No one knows what's going to happen. And when there's no sort of rule of law, that anything goes. And most times it doesn't make sense to the larger population because there's no precedent. That's the whole point of having a legal system, whether intra NFL or at large, that has some semblance of cohesion. And this has none of that.
Yeah. Look, it's a problem because it's hard to you basically have two different competing interests. You have the NFL who wants to apply punishment, and you have Sue Robinson, this third party arbitrator, who's like trying to basically trying to do something the NFL has never done before, which is approach the cases in a similar fashion, like approach discipline in a fashion that is similar across the board.
Well, you're trying to do it from a U.S. criminal justice standpoint within the confines of a legal NFL legal system that doesn't make sense.
Correct. And this to me was the fair point about it too, is like you create punishments. Punishments are created for situations so that people who are being disciplined in theory should know the consequences before they take their actions. Right.
And incidentally, in the case of Calvin Ridley, Calvin Ridley, if he had read it, he would have known that worked.
Right. And look, and here's the difference between Ridley and Deshaun Watson. I'm not saying I agree with this. I'm just telling you what the NFL thinks. Calvin Ridley did something that is, quote unquote, between the lines. It
is actually explicitly laid out in the handbook or wherever you go look at it.
It occurred within the confines of the NFL ecosystem. Deshaun Watson did something that occurred, and while it's a little gray with Watson here because he theoretically used the Texans to help, and they had the NDA and all that, which should have probably played a bigger part of that. But Deshaun Watson did something outside of the NFL ecosystem, right? And the NFL has long been hesitant to play police officer. Now, they're fine suspending guys if they feel like it meets a certain thing, but they prefer not to deal with that when possible. But if you do something that violates.
By the way, the head in the sand defense is a terrible reason terrible way to run a company, but go ahead.
No, again, I'm not saying I agree with it. I'm just telling you how the NFL operates.
No, I know.
Oh my.
Not as busy.
That was. Look at Tom Brady. Like, you cannot compare Tom Brady and Deshaun Watson, just like you can't compare Calvin Ridley and Deshaun Watson.
You can't, but here's the pushback.
People are going to. I understand that.
Because why?
Because
punishments are the same.
Optics.
The punishments are the same. Like, what did Tom Brady get, 4 or 6?
Tom Brady got 4.
So the math you're doing is, Tom Brady gets 4 for a football he did not deflate within the lines, and Deshaun Watson getting 6 because why? And that's where you have the disconnect.
I completely understand.
Is there something similar to that in the U.S. criminal justice system where, like, if you get a ticket going 85 and a 55, you'll get a ticket. You're not going to jail for 3 years. Whereas if you get caught with, I don't know, whatever the federal offense is for coke in your car, then you're going to jail. But there's no one in jail with you is going 85 and 55 for coke offense. Is my point, right?
I didn't really follow that. I don't think that.
My point is that deflating the football gets you 4 games, which is just shy of the 6 games for Deshaun Watson doing the things that Judge Robinson admitted that she said he did, right?
Yes.
Right. Regardless of the 23 settlements, she said he did it. Correct?
She said that she basically, and I'm using Mike Florio per Football Talk here to get thread on it, but he said she basically intimated that he lied in his testimony, and that he committed at least 3 very clear offensive. So
that sounds like she thinks he's probably guilty.
The way I took Sue Robinson's conclusion is that she feels like if she were Roger Goodell, she would suspend him for a year. and fine him $8 million and make his return conditional when he comes back. That she thinks that that's not an unreasonable approach, or like something similar, a much bigger punishment. But because of the precedent that's been set by previous punishments, and because what is laid out in the NFL's policy, she felt like the rule of law and the precedent established that 6 games is the appropriate suspension.
Yeah, no, I get all that. And I understand what she was trying to do. And like I've said a couple times now, she was sort of working with one hand tied behind her back or both hands tied, whichever way. So because the
She's
rule of
with a justice, like the criminal justice system, however flawed with its many flaws, has like rules that have been in place for a long time, and
they are written down, and people can refer to them in law libraries.
Yeah.
The NFL legal system, I don't know if it's written down anywhere. It's a couple sheets of paper that talk about inside the line stuff, which involves Calvin Ridley, and then weird arbitrary stuff that's sort of inside the lines in terms of the Deflategate stuff. But it felt like the NFL just sort of made up some stuff also just to suspend Tom Brady 4 games. And what I was trying to make earlier with I need Breacher to make the analogies, but he works when he wants to, is that in the criminal justice system, you will have instances of people who the punishment does not fit the crime. But it feels like more times than not in the NFL universe, the punishment does not fit the crime, especially when compared to other punishments that aren't even in the same conversation, it feels like at times. That's my point.
No, it's problematic to rely on precedent for, one, an unprecedented case, and 2, a system whose precedents are based entirely on the whims of one guy in an office who's basically being advised like based on what's happening in the PR world. So I mean, yeah, it's not a great outcome, I don't think, for the NFL, obviously.
Well, look, they must have known that it wasn't going to be a full year. I mean, this woman's a judge. She's not some lackey you hire to a PR mouthpiece and extension to the NFL and you give her another title. She's I think she was a federal judge. I don't have her resume in front of me, but I think people respect her for her legal career, and the NFL must have known. They have lawyers on staff. They have lawyers that make a lot of money on staff. So now the question becomes, when are we going to appeal? Because we have 3 days. Do it now, tomorrow, the day after. And then what is Roger Goodell or whoever makes a punishment going to decide? So I feel like if they appeal, it ain't going to be 8 games if they appeal it.
No. If they are either going to hammer him for a full year and fine him, or they're just going to let it flow.
So let's say they appeal. Roger Goodell or whoever he puts out in front of the microphone says 1 year, $8 million fine. What is Roger Goodell, say the next press conference when someone asks, why did you even have Judge Robinson hear this out the first time?
Yeah, and I mean, I don't know what to say.
My mic's not working. I'll be right back.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. It's been, I mean, the problem for Goodell is that, well, the problem for the press conference situation is that I don't think he's going to have a press conference to like the Super Bowl. I mean, he probably won't talk to anybody for a while. The Ray Rice thing was a totally...
And quickly, someone in the comments mentions that the NFL only heard Judge Robinson made the appeal based on made the ruling based on the 5 cases. Yeah, no, we know that. But she also, as Brinson noted, came away with the impression that he was doing things that he lied and he was probably guilty.
If she thinks he is, like, she gave him the maximum punishment that she felt was applicable under the current NFL precedent for discipline. Now, I am not saying that I agree with Sue Robinson. I'm not saying that I agree with the NFL's precedent. Like, I get it.
Wait, what's the NFL's precedent?
Like, there is no precedent.
That's fair. Okay, I want to make sure that I didn't miss something because there is no precedent.
Yeah, the NFL doesn't have a precedent.
But she's, like I just said, she's trying to apply real law to
that's the issue.
Lawless universe.
Yeah. Josh Dooley is asking, does it end up in federal court? Will the PA sue the NFL if they change it?
That I don't know. You're the lawyer adjacent, Brinson.
Yeah, thanks. I need to look at it. I don't know what I'm not going to read the CBA live on podcast, but I'll go look at it when we get done. I believe that.
I don't think any of the previous suspensions for players, either in between the lines or off the field, none of them were. You can't appeal anymore. It's part of, you signed the contract, and the CBA is such that I think Roger Goodell's ruling is close to final. Did Tom Brady try to take it to federal court?
Yeah. They
went. Oh, they did. Okay. Well, there you go.
But that's not the personal conduct policy.
Victor Garcia says we should bring in Sean Wagner McGough for his expert on
the one time we wish Sean was still here.
He's an environmental lawyer. He doesn't know anything.
Yeah, he's worthless. Yeah, I'm not going to try and. Say something for like 30 seconds while I try and figure this out.
So it's 6 games, and the NFL will decide in 3 days. And strictly speaking about football, if you just look at those 6 games, that's the easiest possible schedule for Jacoby Brissett or whoever ends up being the quarterback for the Browns. Who is it? The first game is at Carolina in the Baker Mayfield revenge game in which he may not even play, which is funny on some level. They host the Jets. Pittsburgh, they host on a Thursday night game. At Atlanta, Chargers, Patriots. 3-3 feels eminently possible, and you could sneak a win. If you beat the Steelers, in addition to the Panthers, Jets, and Falcons, that's 4-2 when Deshaun Watson comes back. And you've only played one division game. You come back, I think it's at Baltimore, then Cincinnati, then the bye week. And then the rest of the schedule, other than the divisional games, aren't that tough either. So strictly speaking, football-wise, this feels like a win for the Browns. Feels like a win for Deshaun Watson. It's clearly a win for Deshaun Watson in terms of his contract. He's only going to miss out on $350,000, which is mind-boggling. But again, I don't know if Judge Robinson had any comment on the fact that they jerry-rigged the schedule. But what did you find out?
All right. So here's the deal. This is so screwed up. So either party may appeal the ruling. Do you know who they appeal to?
Roger Goodell.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. No, that's what I've been saying.
The NFL is like, hey, Roger, we'd like to appeal. And Roger's like,
the only way you couldn't appeal is if Judge Robinson decided that 0 games were
correct. Yeah. The appeal shall be limited to arguments why, based on the evidentiary record below, the amount of discipline, if any, should be modified. The commissioner or his designee will issue a written decision that will constitute full, final, and complete disposition of this dispute and will be binding on the players, clubs, and the parties to this agreement. That is straight from the new CBA.
So that means Roger Goodell has final say.
So to Josh Dooley's question about the federal court thing, yes, in that sense, if Goodell were to suspend Deshaun Watson for a full year, changing the discipline, but because there is no next step in the CBA process, that's the end of it, right? Then the only way for Watson to try and overturn that would be to go to federal court. So they would have to file in federal court and claim that it would basically be like the discipline process is a sham. Blah, blah, blah.
Let me I had to look it up quickly. 2018 was July. 2016 was Deflategate. Excuse me. And here's the first line of the AP story. Quarterback Tom Brady's last best chance to avoid serving a 4-game Deflategate suspension to start the new season was flatly rejected Wednesday by an appeals court in a 1-sentence rejection. So I haven't gotten to the point where they explain it, but I would imagine it has something to do with the CBA and whatever the rules were there, which are probably slightly different than they are now.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. Is like you can go to federal court and sue and say that Roger Goodell is overstepping his bounds. But again, the CBA, which the union signed, says that the commissioner will issue a written decision that will constitute full, final, and complete disposition of this dispute. So it's like, good luck with that.
Right.
All right. You know what? We should do a show with no break. Sorry, Nada. We just have places to go. Okay. Anything else that we need to cover on the Watson thing? Because now that reading the CBA, I do think that the NFL will appeal.
So let's say they appeal. They have 3 days. So today's Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday have to appeal. And let's just take as given they're going to appeal. When will Roger Goodell issue his ruling? After Thursday.
Let's see. Let's say they appeal. They'll appeal at the last possible second, obviously.
So Thursday.
They'll file their appeal on Thursday. And then
you can't wait 2 weeks.
The following Friday will issue the ruling.
Sweet Jesus. So you have to wait another 8 days?
Well, he won't issue the ruling in 1 day because that the NFL would say, I think the NFL in their minds would be like, that's too fast. The other thing
they've been thinking about it. It's not like news.
No, but Roger Goodell has to act like the NFL. Roger Goodell has to act like he's
Okay. All right.
He can't be like, yep, like you don't want to make the appeal process look completely like a complete sham. You get the appeal and you make your ruling in like 24 hours. It could be Friday, I guess. Friday news dump that Watson's been suspended the whole season at 4:30 on Friday would be something else. I would guess it's the following week, but that's just me.
All right. Well, maybe there is no sense of true urgency because you already know it's going to be no better than 6 games for the Browns. So you can push it back a little bit to give the appearance of deliberation. Okay, fair enough.
And let's just look really quick. Worth noting, the Browns schedule. So I know you talked about it already, but
the first 6 games are cupcakes. 4-2 is a real possibility. 3-3 feels eminently possible.
The first 6, yeah, for sure. But it gets him off of the first or the second week of Amazon Prime, which I think I think Amazon is probably happy about that.
Oh yeah, I mean that's way down the list of things to be worried about if you're Amazon, the NFL, Roger Goodell, Deshaun Watson.
All right, so you over under 8 games.
Oh,
I'll tell you what, over under 6.5 games. Final suspension for Deshaun Watson.
Yeah, that's
Roger Goodell's ruling.
That's the line. Over.
Yeah, I'll take over too. The more, I mean, you read that CBA and and
it could be a case of Judge Robinson just sort of kicking the can, not down the road, or putting the ball into the court of the NFL.
Court. Saying, look, I'm not gonna make this ruling. I'm not gonna make this ruling based on my feelings. I'm gonna make it based on how I think the
law, literally the NFL law in quotation marks, and then you, as the supreme emperor, do what you want. It's on you, my man.
Yeah, if you want to take control of the CBA and do what you want to do, that's fine. Because she's already, when did they sign the new CBA? I'll tell you in a second if I can get this PDF to scroll all the way up. She has, I think, is like close to being at the point where they could move on from her, or she could move on, because it's like a minimum 2-year term.
Oh yeah,
and it started in 2020, so yeah, she can.
She ain't hanging around either way. I mean, this is over for her.
Yeah, I'm going to say the NFL appeals.
Yeah, I think.
And I'm going to see Roger Goodell lays the hammer down. That would be my final prediction for this. All right.
Well, yep.
Anything else?
No, I agree. I think that's right. He ain't appealing to make it 7 games.
No, if they appeal, it's yeah. I mean, it's the over under for this. For those in the comments wondering about it, it comes down to
yes or it's yes or no.
Is the NFL going to appeal?
All right.
And if the NFL appeals, like, to suggest that Roger Goodell is not in the know on what the NFL is going to do with the appeal is obviously like.
So if you see a number like 8, bang the over.
Yeah.
The only number should be 6.5.
Right. The point being is, like, if the NFL appeals, Roger Goodell knows what he knows what he's going to do. He's going to lay the hammer down.
What if the NFL appeals and Roger suspends it for 6.5 games? Do you actually push the bet with Caesars?
Yes. It's, well, guess I get refunded for that $50 free bet I had on Watson.
Right. A little levity on a serious day. There you go.
All right, that'll do it for us. Obviously, as new information comes out, we'll talk about it on the podcast. We'll have another show, of course, tomorrow. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. For Wilson, I'm Brinson. We'll see you guys later.